I'm Nikki Silver. I'm the Chief Executive of an organisation called Lives, and we're a voluntary sector group in Lincolnshire that's unique to Lincolnshire. And John asked me to come along today really to talk about, from our perspective, how did we think that we could play into a world in which we are creating larger and new communities. I feel that, just picking up on what Nikki and David said, in sort of confessional style, I also was part of the STP in its iterations through the Lincolnshire Sustainable Service Review and then through LHAC and to its final iteration. In my defence, Women and Children's was my bag. But actually quite interesting to see that as it's come out, I come at this from being a voluntary organisation that plays in the emergency care sector, and that document actually really doesn't talk about emergency care. And I was quite surprised when I read the final 140 pages without appendices that it doesn't actually mention the word ambulance. And I think that's something, it's not a criticism of the document, but I think it says something about the complexity of the world that we live in when we're talking about reorganising health services and reorganising the way that we respond to the health needs of our communities. And yet there are some really fundamental pieces that haven't kind of made the final cut. I'm also on the steering group for the national, the Centre of Excellence for Rural Health too. So there's a lot of really interesting and innovative work going on in Lincolnshire at the moment. It's quite an interesting time to be part of this community, whatever form that may take. I'm confused now, but in a good way. There's two questions that I wanted to sort of touch on a bit today. They're questions that we actually at Lives think about quite a lot, and they're really about where do we fit and what's the contribution that we make. And some of the things that we talked about earlier today were about contribution, and about as people, as communities form and people get to the point where perhaps they're integrated and they've gone through that change cycle, they're then thinking about contribution and where do we fit and how do we give something back and how do we become part of this community. So I don't come at these questions from any sort of academic standpoint. I come at it really using my own organisation and my own experience as a bit of a case study, really, of how things are being done by a group of people in Lincolnshire, with the view of really contributing to the community, looking at how can we make our communities strong and how can we make them resilient. How can we encourage the people in our communities to take some responsibility. I think that's one of the things that's mentioned in the STP. Responsibility, maybe for their own health at a personal level, but maybe also for the health outcomes of their friends, neighbours, families, the people that live around them. So these are the two things really that I want to talk about a little bit. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Lives. No, good, I'm really glad, because sometimes I go places and people haven't heard of us, which, considering we've been around for nearly 50 years, I'm on a mission, and Carl's with me on this, thank you very much, as are 700 other people that we've got out there in Lincolnshire, to make sure that everybody knows really the really important role that my volunteers play. When you phone 999 and ask for an ambulance, you may well receive a Lives volunteer. We're often the first person on scene. We train our volunteers to bring with them a skill set that means that they can make a difference in those first few minutes of a medical emergency, which we know in lots of cases can have a real impact on the outcomes for that for that patient's health. We began in 1970. We began as a small group of doctors. In response to a road traffic collision that actually didn't happen in Lincolnshire. It happened on the A1, but it did involve a person from the Boston area, actually. And in those days, ambulance drivers were literally that. Now that would be regarded as a disparaging term, but at that time they were ambulance drivers. They drove along, they picked up the patient, they put them in the ambulance and they took them to hospital. And they didn't really have much in the way of additional skills. And it was recognised that particularly in a county such as Lincolnshire, with its rurality, with its really challenging road network. One of my favourite statistics about Lincolnshire is 6,000 miles of roadway, no motorway, and only about less than 50 miles of dual carriageway. You know, that's kind of unique, but it gives a flavour for how difficult it is to move around our county. And we know that we have significant issues with road traffic collisions in Lincolnshire, and it was felt that if we could get an extended skill set to those scenes, we could make a difference for patients. Two doctors in Lincolnshire decided they'd have a meeting to see if there was any interest amongst their GP colleagues, and more than 100 turned up, and that was the beginning of Lives and of the Lives community back in 1970. 1999, we were asked if we would look at setting up a community first responder scheme. So that's about taking lay people and having lay people respond, training them and equipping them to be able to respond to emergencies in their area. We said, yes, that sounds like a jolly good idea. And they said, great, but there's no money. But I guess we're kind of used to that. That's part of being in the charity sector. So we've been doing that for about 18 years now. And in October last year, Nikki referred to clinical assessment service as being one of the developments coming out of the STP. We started acting as, I guess, a disposition, so responding not only to 999 calls but to 111 calls. This is still in pilot. This is a really good example of the challenges of working in a multi-agency environment across lots of different partners, but we're sticking with it because we believe that it's got the opportunity to make a real difference for patients, particularly those patients that want to stay at home, that they don't want to be in hospital, and we think that the skills that we bring can really help to do that, support those people to stay in their community. So that's just a little bit about who we are. Our charitable aims are about providing that 999 emergency response, but actually there are two key principles that really underpin what we do and why we exist. The first of those is a real belief that it doesn't matter where you live in our very large county, you should be entitled to the same health outcomes, whether you live in the city, whether you live on the coast, whether you live in a rural community. But we also know that with the best will in the world, our colleagues at EMAS cannot put an ambulance on every street corner. Nor do we actually believe that that's the answer. But we do think that by organising ourselves differently, responding to the challenges and using the skills and enthusiasm and commitment and willingness to be involved that exist in our communities, we can achieve those I guess, equalities of outcome. The other thing that we really believe in is actually by encouraging resilience in our communities, encouraging our communities to be able to support themselves and support each other. And we do that by actually training people, equipping them and supporting them, actually giving them the skills to be able to make a difference. I just want to share one small example with you, because often people that know us think of us as the cardiac arrest people. We run out there with a defibrillator and an oxygen bottle when somebody's in cardiac arrest, and we do that quite a lot, but it's actually only about 1 in 80 of the jobs that we go to. But I received a call on Tuesday from one of the dispatchers at the ambulance service to commend one of our responders who lives in a very rural village in Lincolnshire, who'd been dispatched to a job and who'd got there and said, you know what, this patient doesn't have a medical need. This patient actually has a social need. And that responder, that volunteer, then got in touch with the ambulance dispatch and had that conversation actually with the clinical assessment team there, which tends to be a nursing team, and they arranged some social support for that patient. But what was great was an ambulance may well have been able to do that. An ambulance crew may well have made that same recognition and said, you know what, this isn't a medical need and this is what this patient needs. But what was great about having a volunteer in the community was that the next day they went back to see that patient to make sure that actually he was accessing the services that had been set up for him. And he's actually somebody that is vulnerable, is reluctant to access services, but they've built that bond of trust. And so I think it's just a nice example of the way that actually we can encourage communities to look after themselves if we give people the skills and equipment to be able to do that. We work really closely in partnership with others, and I think a lot of today has been talking about partnerships. So for us, the two key ones are with our ambulance service colleagues, and we also work very closely with fire and rescue services. I'm not sure how widely known it is, but actually in Lincolnshire, more than half of what fire and rescue services do is actually responding to health needs. They've become really, really good at preventing fires, which is fantastic, but they've got a great workforce out there, both retained and full-time, with a great skill set. And I think if we're thinking about building communities, it's not just about the churches and community groups and voluntary organisations such as ourselves, but there are statutory bodies out there that have got skills too that they can bring to the party. We do work really closely, though, with other organisations. We've got, I think a good example is we've got really close links with the scouting movement. There's quite a lot of synergies between the organisations. I think I was just thinking as you were talking, David, that I'm pretty sure that one of our responders is also one of your chaplains. So again, we've got links between organisations all over the place. And I think one of the key things, I think, to pick up on what Nikki said, is about understanding those and being able to draw them together. I want to just talk a little bit about volunteering, because if you read any of the press about volunteering, what you'll hear is that it's in decline. And this is data from the Office of National Statistics. It's from March of last year. And it says that nationally, volunteering's down by 7% in 3 years, which actually, that's quite a lot. And I'm not challenging the national data, but I'm here to say that actually in our experience at Lives, that isn't the case. What we've seen over the last 3 years is actually our volunteer contributions gone up by just over 20%. So there may be things happening on a national picture, but there can be different things happening locally and different things happening in different communities. What they do say in the data and what we are finding is that young people are volunteering more. And I think this is something for us to think about too. I think I was a child of the 80s, and we were kind of, Wall Street, Greed is Good, Gordon Gekko, all the rest of it. And I didn't grow up really thinking about volunteering or thinking particularly about my community. And maybe that's that I grew up in New Zealand and things were different here. I don't know. I can't speculate. But I think what we've got now is a generation of young people coming through who have been through programs like Duke of Edinburgh or NCS and are actually coming through with a more community-minded mindset, perhaps, or spirit than perhaps I've recognised in myself of the same age. The figures show that not only are more young people taking part in volunteering, and we're up to over 50%, but also that they're spending more time volunteering. And certainly our experience bears this out. Over the last 3 years, more than 50% of our new recruits into Lives have been under the age of 30. And I think it's quite easy when we think about volunteering to have a perception that it's older people that have got the time to do that. And we have lots of older people too. We've actually also got quite a lot of working people that give up their evenings and weekends. And we've got quite a lot of stay-at-home, largely mums. I can think of a couple of dads, but largely mums who actually volunteer for us in the daytime while their children are at school too. So there's a lot of people out there that volunteer for different reasons and in different ways. But I think that shift in young people is quite interesting and something that as we think about building communities and how can we harness that might be something that we should give some thought to. The other thing is the data will tell you that women volunteer more than men, that more women are involved and that they give more time. That's also not the case in our organisation. More than 60% or around 60% of our volunteers are men. So again, I'm not sure quite what it is about us, but we do have some profile that's a bit different from what the data's saying. We're actually been doing some work over the last 18 months with the University of Lincoln, actually looking at some of our volunteers and why they volunteer, what they get out of it. I was speaking with the person that's leading that research earlier this week, and we're looking to see the report certainly in the next few months. There's some quite interesting themes coming out of that. So if I sort of take that and think, right, so we, despite what the data says, we have got a community of people out there that, I'm just watching the time, but I'm sure you'll tell me if I'm getting close, that we have got a community of people out there that are at that phase, if we think about the cycle from this morning, where they're thinking about contribution and about how can they get involved and give something back. What can we do? What can we do? What could the voluntary sector bring to a county that's looking at 100,000 new homes? I think the first thing is there is a connectedness in communities, and certainly the way we structure ourselves at Lives, where we work at a group level, at a very local level. We have 165 groups across the county, so we're working at a very local level. Most villages, and certainly all towns, and within City of Lincoln, we've got many groups. Have a group, and they do have links to their local community. So if I think about my village. We've got about 7 people in my local group, but actually they know everybody, and they know the people in the local church and in the scout group and at the school and at the swimming club and the cricket club and the bowls club and actually the Darby and Joan group and the welcome club where they go for lunch. So there is a connectedness there amongst existing voluntary organisations that I think we can tap into. I think there are also some structures that exist in voluntary organisations that could be useful. I think we really need to understand the ethos behind volunteering, why people are volunteering, what they get out of it. And I'm going to come on to that in the next slide or the one after. I can't remember what order they're in, but I'll come on to that before I finish. And I think the other thing that's really, really important about volunteers, and this is probably something that in my professional life takes up probably more than 50% of my thought process, but is about really valuing the contribution that every individual makes. and we think about communities and we think about groups, but I think we also need to make sure we don't lose sight of the individual and the what's in it for them. We have a really strong ethos at Lives based on inclusivity, that there is a role for everybody in our organisation at whatever level it is that they choose to develop their skills and develop themselves. So we had some feedback. I think pre-hospital emergency medicine, the world that we work in, has moved on a lot over the last few years. And there are a lot more skills available, equipment available, and we have people out there that are really hungry for that, and we've been rolling that out and training them and giving them new skills, and we've got lots of people that are really excited about that. But actually we had a group of people that said, you know what, I got involved 15 years ago because I just wanted to go to my neighbour when they were in cardiac arrest, and I feel left out, left behind, overwhelmed. And we kind of stopped and went, okay, there's a place for that too. And actually we've created a new level, a new sort of volunteer role within the organisation that means those people can do what they want. But people like Carl, hope you don't mind if I single you out, who's one of our most senior level of responders that carry, he's got great drugs.
Not my sort.
But that have the skills to be able to do more advanced interventions, that do carry a number of drugs, for example, that mean that they can help patients in some quite trying, challenging situations, that there's a role for them too. And we've got a pathway to use, Vicky's gone, but we've got a pathway that takes people as far as they want to go on. But that for me is all about valuing that individual and making sure that there's a place for them and they're getting what they need out of it too. Because if we value them, then they can contribute to the community. So what's in it for our volunteers? And as I said, we've been doing some work with Lincoln University on this, and this, they'd probably be horrified if they saw this slide, because I'm sure this is a massive, great thesis that they've worked up, and I've reduced it to 3 bullet points. So, and there's a lot more to the research than this. But a large number of our people volunteer because they like the buzz, that warm feeling inside that they've helped somebody, that they've done something good. And they don't do it for the recognition, and they don't do it because they want certificates or accolades or badges or just going home and knowing, you know what, I did a good thing today, is enough for those people. We've got some people though, and I think this is just as valid, that actually they really like the recognition. They like the uniform. We all quite like the uniform, don't we? It's a new uniform. They like the uniform. They like to be recognised in the community. They love the badges on the car. They like to be recognised, and that's fine too, because those people are making just as valid a contribution, just as important a contribution. But what they're getting out of it is different, and we need to make sure that they get that. And we've got quite a large cohort of people that I think join us, and I think this might be something about the youth piece as well, because they want to develop those skills. East Midlands Ambulance Service has just done their latest recruitment for paramedic trainees in Lincolnshire, and every single one has gone through Lives. Every single one has come into our organisation and made their way through the grades. We've got quite a number of people in our organisation that started as Lives responders. I use the example of one of our doctors who actually was planning to go to university to study engineering, got involved in Lives as a responder, changed his mind. He was a bright lad, lucky he had choices, changed his mind, trained as a doctor, is now an RAF doctor, and to be fair, the kind of guy that if you were upside down in a ditch and he was looking back at you, he's got a brilliant skill set that he brings to the scene. So we've got a lot of people that do join us because they want those skills and career opportunities, and that's great too. My aim is to look after them so as that once they've got that training place, they want to stay with us. We've given them such a good experience, and we continue to want to develop their skills, to want to help them develop their skills, that they continue to make that contribution. And we've got quite a few people that have come in through our organisation like that. But I think it is really important that we make sure that we're asking a lot of people and the contribution that we want them to make. We need to make sure that we're giving back to them too, that it's a two-way relationship. So this is my sales pitch slide, because I can stand here and say this is what we do, but actually how good at it are we? I think we're pretty darn good actually. We saw 21,000 patients last year, which when you consider that those patients were all seen by volunteers in their own time, I think that's a lot of people that we've made a difference to. Since the CFR scheme, so the Community First Responders scheme, launched properly in 2000, we've seen over 200,000 people, which is getting on for more than 1 in 4 people in Lincolnshire, although, of course, we know that some of those people we see over and over again. And we've got 700 volunteers. That's 700 people that give up their time on a regular basis. I've already mentioned the fact that we organise ourselves into groups, but that means that we've got coverage across all the county. Our aspiration is to provide 24/7 coverage across the whole county. We don't do that yet. I estimate we need about 2,000 volunteers to do that. But unfortunately, everyone we bring on costs us £3,000, and we're a charity, so we've got to balance the coverage with the finances as well. What I haven't really mentioned so much is that we also have a number of medics. And we've got 70 of these doctors, nurses and paramedics, and what they do is a little bit different. They bring the kind of skills that you'd get in an emergency department or in a critical care unit to the side of the road. And they at its most senior level, they can anaesthetise patients, they can perform surgeries if need be. They really bring absolutely life-saving skills. The kind of things that people associate with the air ambulance. Our guys have the same skill set, but we're not restricted by the weather or by the daylight hours. We're talking about some follow-on work really about looking at quality measures for what we do, but the only one we really have at the moment is what we call our ROSC rate. So that's a return of spontaneous circulation. So when somebody's had a cardiac arrest and we hook them up to a defib and we do our thing, do they come back? Nationally, the figure for that is about between 8%, the best I've ever seen it is 13%. It sits around about 8 to 10%. And if you think that we know that when your heart is stopped in cardiac arrest, for every minute it's stopped, your chance of survival goes down by about 10%. And we know that the ambulance target is to get to you within 8 minutes. It's not a surprise that nationally it sits around about the 10% mark. I often say to people, if they're going to have a cardiac arrest, come to Lincolnshire. We have a great ROSC rate. Last year we were at just under 32%. So far this year we're sitting at over 40%, and we often sit around about that mark. And then of course at Lincoln County Hospital they've got a fabulous heart unit as well. So if you do have to have one, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but if you do, Lincolnshire's not a bad place to have it. The other thing that we do, and I think is important to remember about the voluntary sector, is that we have knowledge to share as well. So yes, we make a great contribution having, delivering interventions with patients, but we launched a campaign with ourselves and St John and the BBC at the beginning of April, and we're on a mission to train 10,000 people in bystander CPR. Like I said, every minute your heart stopped, chance down by 10%. We also know that in countries such as Denmark, where every child at school is trained in CPR, the rate of survival goes up threefold. So we're on a mission to train 10,000 people. So far, since April, we've trained 4,500. So you've got an army of people out there with really valuable knowledge that are there to be kind of harnessed and marshalled and used for great good as well. So this is my last slide because I just wanted to leave you with just some things, not so much difficult questions to answer, but things that you might want to think about afterwards or take out of today. The first of those being that there is a community ethos out there, and I think a lot of what we've talked about today is the challenge of building new communities, although as we've said, some of it is about expanding what we've already got. There is an ethos, particularly in our rural areas, so let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's think about how we can tap into what we've already got. Never lose sight of why people are contributing. Why is it that they're making an impact, want to make an impact, and let's make sure that they're getting something out of it too. And then let's create opportunities for those communities to grow and develop, because in my experience, when you give people or groups of people those opportunities, they actually never fail to delight you. Thank you.